Have you ever looked at someone's unwavering religious faith? A belief held against all evidence and had the quiet, nagging thought, is that entirely healthy? It's a delicate but crucial question, and one we're not afraid to tackle. This video isn't about cheap insults, it's a careful and sober analysis. We'll place the official diagnostic criteria for certain delusional disorders side by side with the core tenets of religious faith, examining the fascinating parallel in how both require holding firm beliefs in the absence of, or even contrary to, clear evidence. We will explore the cognitive architecture and psychological needs that can lead a mind down the path of unshakable conviction, whether we label it faith or something else. This isn't a diagnosis, but a challenging discussion about the very nature of belief. In many parts of the world, even asking a question like this is unthinkable. For a mind that dares to question, it can be a lonely road. If this is the kind of critical thinking you appreciate, please like this video and subscribe to the God Mirage. I'd be fascinated to hear from you in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from and what the general attitude towards questioning faith is in your community. The clinical blueprint. Before we can even begin to compare religion to a clinical condition, we must first arm ourselves with the proper tools. We must speak the language of the clinicians themselves. Let us turn then, not to a holy book, but to the Bible of modern psychiatry, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, currently in its 5th edition, the DSM-5. Within its pages, we find the clinical definition of a delusion, a cornerstone of many psychotic disorders. The DSM-5 defines a delusion as follows: a false belief based on an incorrect inference about external reality that is firmly held despite what almost everyone else believes, and despite what constitutes incontrovertible and obvious proof or evidence to the contrary. It also adds a crucial qualifier, which we will return to. The belief is not one ordinarily accepted by other members of the person's culture or subculture. Let's dissect this definition, piece by excruciating piece, like a theologian poring over a sacred text. First, a false belief based on an incorrect inference about external reality. This is the immediate and most obvious hurdle. What constitutes a false belief? For a psychiatrist evaluating a patient who believes he is the reincarnation of Napoleon Bonaparte, the falsity is easy to establish. We have historical records, DNA, and a complete lack of evidence for his claim. The belief is at odds with a mountain of verifiable external reality. But what about a belief that an immaterial, omnipotent, and invisible deity created the universe? By its very nature, this claim is constructed to be unfalsifiable. You cannot put God in a test tube. You cannot measure the Holy Spirit. Religious claims often retreat into the realm of the metaphysical, a convenient philosophical fortress designed to be impervious to the canons of physical evidence. However, many religious beliefs do not remain in this safe, abstract space. They make concrete claims about external reality. The belief that the Earth is only 6,000 years old is a direct contradiction of overwhelming and mutually reinforcing evidence from geology, physics, astronomy, and biology. The belief that a global flood occurred just a few thousand years ago is thoroughly debunked by every relevant scientific field. The belief that a specific prayer can cure a specific disease like cancer is a claim about external reality that can be and has been tested, with utterly disappointing results for the faithful. In these instances where faith makes testable assertions about the world, it frequently fails the test. The inference is incorrect, and the belief is, by any reasonable standard of evidence, false. Second, firmly held despite incontrovertible and obvious proof or evidence to the contrary. This is perhaps the most striking parallel. The defining characteristic of a delusional individual is not just their strange belief, but their absolute, unshakable tenacity in the face of all countervailing logic and evidence. You can show the man who believes he is Napoleon his birth certificate, introduce him to his living parents, present him with a library of history books. His belief will not waver. In fact, he will likely invent secondary, ad hoc explanations to protect his core belief. The documents are forgeries by my enemies, or you are all part of the conspiracy to keep me from my throne. Now consider a conversation with a devout young Earth creationist. You can present them with the fossil record, radiometric dating, genetic sequencing, and the cosmic microwave background radiation. You can explain how these independent lines of evidence all converge on an ancient universe and a gradual process of evolution. The response is rarely, "Oh, thank you for this information. I will now reconsider my entire worldview." Instead, the response is a masterclass in belief defense. The fossils were planted by the devil to test our faith. Radiometric dating is unreliable and based on flawed assumptions. Scientists are part of a vast secular conspiracy to deny God's truth. The core belief that a specific holy book is literally true is non-negotiable. All evidence must be warped, reinterpreted, or dismissed to fit the predetermined conclusion. This cognitive process, this fanatical protection of a core belief against an onslaught of contrary evidence, is structurally identical to the process observed in a clinical delusion. The content differs, but the mechanism is the same. And this brings us to the third part of the definition, despite what almost everyone else believes. And here is the great escape hatch. Here is the get-out-of-jail-free card for religion. A man who believes he is Napoleon is alone. A woman who believes her neighbor is secretly replacing her thoughts with alien signals is, we hope, in a minority of one. But a person who believes a consecrated wafer literally transforms into the flesh of a 2,000-year-old demigod is joined by over 1 billion other people. The lone believer is mad. The billion believers are a congregation. This, then, is the crux of the matter. The DSM-5, in its clinical wisdom, inserts that final qualifier. The belief is not one ordinarily accepted by other members of the person's culture or subculture. This single sentence neatly excises religion, and indeed any widely held superstition, from the realm of pathology. But it forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question. Does the popularity of a belief have any bearing on its rationality? Does a delusion become sane simply by going viral? The tyranny of the majority. This cultural exception in the DSM is a sociological necessity, but a logical fallacy. It's a practical tool to prevent psychiatry from being used as a weapon of cultural imperialism, to stop psychiatrists in one country from declaring the religious beliefs of another country to be a mass mental illness. It is an act of diplomacy, not of scientific rigor. Because psychologically, the question remains, is the cognitive state of a person who believes something without or against evidence fundamentally different? If he is surrounded by 100 people who agree with him versus being utterly alone, let us conduct a thought experiment. Imagine a small, isolated village in a deep jungle, cut off from the modern world for centuries. For generations, every single inhabitant of this village has believed with absolute conviction that the sun is a giant magical bird that flies across the sky each day. They have elaborate rituals to ensure the bird returns each morning. They tell stories of the great nest where it sleeps at night. Their entire culture, their morality, their sense of reality is built upon this belief. No one in the village questions it. It is an objective fact of their world. Now, an anthropologist stumbles upon this village. She brings with her the knowledge of orbital mechanics, gravity, and nuclear fusion. She knows, with a certainty backed by centuries of science and observation, that the sun is a star and the earth is a planet that rotates. From the perspective of the villagers, the anthropologist is clearly delusional. She holds a bizarre, evidence-free belief. What is this gravity she speaks of? You cannot see it. That contradicts what everyone else believes. She is a lone dissenter against a unanimous consensus. From the perspective of the anthropologist and indeed the rest of the world, the entire village is suffering from a shared, culturally ingrained delusion. Their belief is based on an incorrect inference about external reality, a bird versus a star. And it is held firmly despite the evidence she could present, say with a telescope and a Foucault pendulum. The DSM's cultural exception forces us into a paradox. Inside the village, the sane are mad and the mad are sane. It suggests that reality is a matter of democratic vote. But truth, of course, is not a democracy. The sun remains a star regardless of how many people believe it's a bird. The Earth continues to rotate whether you believe it's the center of the universe or not. The cultural exception is a statement about social norms, not about correspondence of a belief with reality. It effectively states that a shared delusion is not a delusion for the purposes of a clinical diagnosis. It's a social agreement to not call it that. This is what makes the question so slippery. We are observing a phenomenon that has the form and structure of a delusion, unshakable belief in the absence of or contrary to evidence. But it is given a special protected status because it has achieved social acceptance. History is littered with examples of such shared, sane delusions. The belief in witchcraft was a deeply embedded cultural norm in Europe and colonial America for centuries, leading to the persecution and murder of countless innocent people. Was this belief rational then, but irrational now? Or was it always irrational, but simply popular for a time? The Four Humors theory of medicine, which posited that health depended on the balance of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, was the unquestioned medical consensus for over 1,000 years. Was it a sound medical theory in 1200 AD? Of course not. It was a shared incorrect belief system that cost innumerable lives. Why then should religion be granted a unique immunity from this kind of retroactive analysis? Is it because its claims are grander, its promises more comforting, its traditions more ancient? The argument that a belief is not a delusion because it is cultural or religious is, when examined closely, an appeal to tradition and an appeal to popularity, two of the most well-known logical fallacies. It's an argument that sidesteps the core psychological question: what are the mental mechanisms that allow a human mind to build, maintain, and defend a belief system that has little or no tether to verifiable reality? The mind's Mirage-Maker. To truly understand the parallel, we must move beyond definitions and look at the cognitive architecture itself. We need to examine the specific mental tools, biases, and shortcuts that the human brain uses, and see how they are employed in both religious conviction and in what we might call idiosyncratic delusions. What we find is that the same set of faulty wiring is at play in both, the only difference being the subject matter. Let's begin with the mother of all cognitive biases: confirmation bias. This is our brain's powerful innate tendency to seek out, interpret, favor, and recall information in a way that confirms or supports our pre-existing beliefs. We are not neutral observers of reality, we are lawyers, building a case for a conclusion we have already reached. A person with a persecutory delusion who believes their coworkers are plotting against them will interpret every whispered conversation, every closed door, every sideways glance as proof of the conspiracy. They will ignore all instances of kindness or neutrality from their coworkers. Their reality becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, painted by confirmation bias. Now observe this same mechanism in a religious context. A believer prays for a sick relative who then recovers. They hail it as a miracle, irrefutable proof of God's power and mercy. They conveniently ignore or explain away the millions of other devoutly religious people who prayed for sick relatives who did not recover. They remember the time they prayed for a job and got it, not the 50 times they prayed for a parking spot and had to circle the block. They read their holy book and find passages that seem to speak directly to their current life situation, seeing it as a sign from the divine, while glossing over the hundreds of contradictory, irrelevant, or morally abhorrent passages in the very same text. They are cherry-picking reality to fit their belief. The mechanism is identical. It's the brain's confirmation engine, chugging away to protect a cherished idea. Next, consider a closely related process: motivated reasoning. This is a more active form of bias. While confirmation bias is a passive filtering, motivated reasoning is the active marshalling of our intellectual faculties to destroy counter-arguments and bolster our preferred position. We use our intelligence not to find the truth, but to win the argument for our team. The classic example in religion is theodicy, the attempt to solve the problem of evil. The logical problem is simple. If an all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good God exists, why is there so much gratuitous suffering in the world? A straightforward, logical analysis might conclude that one of those premises about God must be wrong. But that is not what motivated reasoning does. Instead, it generates a host of complex, untestable, and often contradictory justifications. The suffering is a test of our faith. It's a punishment for sin, even for newborn babies with cancer. God gave us free will, and evil is a consequence of that. We cannot possibly understand God's mysterious plan. These are not attempts to solve the problem, but sophisticated intellectual shields to protect the core belief from the problem. The goal is not truth. The goal is cognitive comfort. Now let's explore a more primal mechanism, what the philosopher Daniel Dennett calls the intentional stance. Our brains have evolved a hypersensitive agency detection device. For our ancestors on the savannah, it was far safer to mistake the wind in the grass for a hidden lion than to mistake a hidden lion for the wind. The cost of a false positive, unnecessary fear, was low, while the cost of a false negative, being eaten, was catastrophic. As a result, we have a profound, deeply ingrained tendency to attribute agency, intention, and consciousness to the world around us. We see faces in the clouds, we get angry at our computer as if it's deliberately thwarting us. We see purpose and design where there is only randomness and natural law. Religion is the ultimate expression of this intentional stance. It takes this cognitive tick and scales it up to the entire cosmos. A drought isn't a meteorological event, it's the anger of a sky god. A good harvest isn't the result of favorable weather and hard work, it's a blessing from a fertility goddess. The universe itself didn't just happen. It was created for a purpose by a conscious agent. This agency detector, so useful for survival on a small scale, becomes the seedbed for gods on a cosmic scale. It creates the mirage of a mind behind it all. These cognitive shortcuts are universal. They are features of every human brain, the ghost in our machine. But I'm curious about your own experiences. Have you ever caught yourself or someone you know using one of these reasoning patterns to defend a religious belief? What was it? Perhaps it was a moment of stark confirmation bias or a classic invocation of God works in mysterious ways to paper over a glaring logical contradiction. Maybe you've seen the intentional stance in action, attributing a lucky coincidence to a divine plan. Share your story in the comments. Reading through them is like creating a collaborative field guide to the applied psychology of faith, the brain on God. Let's move from the software of our biases to the hardware itself, the 3-pound universe of meat and electricity cradled within our skulls. If belief is a program, then the brain is the computer it runs on. And neuroscientists in recent decades have begun to map the circuits that light up when that program is executed. The findings are, to say the least, suggestive. A classic starting point is the temporal lobe. For over a century, neurologists have noted a fascinating connection between temporal lobe epilepsy, TLE, and a condition known as hyperreligiosity. Some patients with TLE report profound, overwhelming mystical experiences during or between their seizures. Sense of divine presence, cosmic significance, and absolute certainty about religious truths. The famed neuroscientist V.S. Ramachandran documented patients who would become obsessed with religion, spending hours in prayer or theological debate, all stemming from an electrical storm in a specific part of their brain. This doesn't prove that God is a seizure, of course, but it does provide powerful evidence that the capacity for intense religious experience is a neurological phenomenon, a state that can be switched on by stimulating the right cluster of neurons. Our sense of the divine, it seems, has a physical address in the brain. This has led to the popular, though overly simplistic idea of a God spot in the brain. The reality is more complex and far more compelling. Religious experience isn't one spot, it's a network, a symphony of brain activity. When monks meditate or Franciscan nuns pray, brain scans show a fascinating pattern. The frontal lobes, responsible for focused attention, light up as they concentrate on their spiritual target. Simultaneously, activity in the parietal lobes, specifically the part that helps us orient ourselves in three-dimensional space and distinguish self from other, decreases significantly. This quieting of the parietal lobe likely creates the subjective feeling of oneness with the universe, of the self dissolving into something larger, a core component of mystical experience. The boundaries of the ego literally melt away as blood flow to that region is reduced. And let us not forget the role of our brain's chemical messengers, the neurotransmitters. A profound spiritual revelation, a moment of perceived divine communication, the ecstatic joy of worship. These experiences are accompanied by a flood of neurochemicals like dopamine and serotonin. Dopamine, the molecule of reward and motivation, makes the experience feel intensely salient and desirable. It trains the brain to seek it out again. This creates a powerful reinforcement loop. The belief feels good because at a chemical level, it is good. The brain rewards itself for believing, forging a pathway that can be as compelling and hard to break as any addiction. The Holy Spirit feels suspiciously like a perfectly timed surge of our own endogenous drugs, the hunger for meaning. But why are our brains so exquisitely receptive to these ideas in the first place? Why did this neurological and cognitive architecture for belief evolve? A computer can have faulty software and hardware, but that doesn't explain why it spends all its time running the same specific program. The answer lies not just in how we believe, but in why we need to. Religion is not merely a cognitive error, it is a powerful, perhaps the most powerful solution to a set of fundamental and deeply terrifying human problems. Let's start with the big one: death. We are, as far as we know, the only species on this planet cursed with the full awareness of its own mortality. A dog does not lie awake at night dreading its eventual non-existence. We do. This knowledge, according to a powerful idea called terror management theory, has the potential to create a constant, paralyzing anxiety. To function, we need a defense mechanism, a buffer against this terror. And what better buffer has ever been invented than religion? The promise of an afterlife, of a soul that transcends the decay of the body, of a reunion with loved ones in paradise? This is not just a comforting idea, it's an existential anesthetic. It takes the terrifying finality of death and transforms it into a mere transition, a doorway to a better reality. It defangs our greatest fear. Beyond the fear of personal oblivion is the fear of cosmic indifference. The universe, as revealed by science, is a place of staggering scale, governed by impersonal laws, randomness, and chaos. There is no inherent purpose, no grand narrative, no cosmic justice. An asteroid could wipe out all life tomorrow and the universe would not notice. This is a profoundly unsettling reality for a creature like us, a creature that seeks patterns and purpose in everything. Religion is the ultimate antidote to this cosmic horror. It superimposes a story, a divine plan, onto the chaos. It assures us that everything, even the most horrific suffering, happens for a reason. It provides a moral compass, a set of rules that, if followed, will lead to reward. It transforms the cold, empty cosmos into a purposeful stage for a divine drama, with humanity playing the starring role. It's the ultimate narcissistic fantasy, and it is irresistibly comforting. Finally, religion satisfies our primal need for the tribe. We are social animals hardwired for belonging. Our survival has always depended on group cohesion. Religion is perhaps the most potent social glue ever conceived. Through shared beliefs, shared rituals, and, crucially, a shared enemy, be it a devil, a rival faith, or secularism itself, religion forges an in-group identity of immense power. It offers a pre-packaged community, a support network, and a sense of shared identity that transcends family or location. To be a part of a faith is to be a part of something larger than oneself, to belong to a global or even cosmic family. This fulfills a deep-seated psychological need, making the believer feel safe, protected, and significant. The line in the sand: adaptation versus maladaptation. So we have a creature with a brain prone to cognitive biases and susceptible to specific neurological events. A creature terrified of death and chaos, and desperate for community. Into this fertile ground, religion plants its seeds, and for many, the fruit it bears is, in a functional sense, positive. This brings us to the crucial distinction that separates a cultural belief system from a clinical mental disorder: its effect on the individual's ability to function. In psychiatry, a set of beliefs or behaviors is not considered a disorder unless it causes clinically significant distress or impairment in a person's life. This is the line in the sand. For billions of people, their religious belief, while arguably based on falsehoods, is adaptive. It provides a moral framework that keeps them from crime. It gives them a community that supports them in times of crisis. It offers hope that helps them endure hardship. It motivates them to perform acts of charity. For these individuals, their faith is a psychological tool that helps them navigate the world. A psychiatrist would have no grounds and no reason to intervene. The mirage is helping them survive the desert. But what happens when the mirage leads the traveler off a cliff? What happens when the belief system ceases to be adaptive and becomes profoundly maladaptive and harmful? This is where the distinction between cherished faith and dangerous delusion becomes terrifyingly blurred. When parents, motivated by an absolute faith in divine healing, deny their diabetic child insulin and instead pray over them as they waste away and die, is that faith still adaptive? Or has it become a fatal delusion? When a person, convinced they are possessed by demons described in their holy book, refuses psychiatric care and descends into a spiral of self-harm and debilitating fear, is that a spiritual struggle or an untreated psychosis? When a family, obeying the dictates of their religion, shuns their own child for marrying outside the faith or for admitting they are gay, severing the most fundamental of human bonds in the name of God, is that belief system functional? In these instances and countless others, the belief is causing profound, measurable harm. It is directly leading to suffering, to social dysfunction, and even to death. Here, the comfortable cultural acceptance of the DSM feels less like a wise clinical qualifier and more like a cowardly evasion. The structure of the belief and its devastating consequences look, for all the world, like the tragic outcome of a delusion that society, for reasons of tradition and numbers, refuses to name. Conclusion: a socially acceptable delusion. So, after this long journey through the corridors of the mind and the pathways of the brain, what is our final verdict? Is religion a mental illness? Clinically speaking, according to the diagnostic manuals we have written for ourselves, the answer is no. The cultural exception clause acts as a definitive firewall. The fact that billions of people share these beliefs, and that for many they are a source of comfort and community, places religion in a protected category, distinct from the idiosyncratic and life-destroying beliefs we label as disorders. But is that the end of the story? Is that a truly satisfying intellectual conclusion? Not for a second. Because what our analysis has shown is something far more profound. While religion may not be a clinical illness, it appears to be a stunning impersonation of one. It operates on the very same psychological and neurological chassis as delusion. It is enabled by the same cognitive biases that characterize irrational thinking. It activates the same brain circuits that produce hallucinatory and mystical experiences. And it preys on the same existential fears that can drive the mind to seek refuge in unreality. Religion is, in essence, a highly structured, culturally transmitted, and socially sanctioned system for indulging in delusional thought. It is the one area of modern life where holding unshakable beliefs with no evidence, or even contrary to mountains of evidence, is not only tolerated but is often celebrated as a virtue. It is a shared mirage we have learned to construct together, a collective hallucination we agree to call sacred. It may not be an illness, but it is a profound and powerful disordering of our relationship with reality. The ultimate question, then, is not whether the individual believer is sick. It is whether a civilization that cherishes a shared, foundational delusion as its highest truth can ever be considered truly healthy. If this exploration of the mind's mirages has given you something to think about, please hit that like button. It tells the great and mysterious algorithm that critical thought is a valuable commodity. And be sure to subscribe to the God Mirage and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the fascinating world of belief. Leave a final thought in the comments. Where do you personally draw the line between faith and delusion? Is there a line at all? Until next time, keep questioning everything.